The Parasitic Empire, a deep dive into exploitation and power. In the annals of history, there have been countless empires that have risen and fallen, each with its own legacy, some of which are remembered for their grandeur, while others are known for their methods of exploitation and parasitism. The term parasitic empire brings to mind the idea of a dominant power that thrives by draining the resources of weaker states or groups. Rather than fostering symbiotic relationships or contributing positively to the civilizations it controls, a parasitic empire relies on extracting wealth, labor, and resources from its territories without offering substantial returns. In this article, we will explore the concept of a parasitic empire, examining its historical manifestations, the mechanisms of parasitism, and the societal and moral implications of such a system. 1. What is a parasitic empire? A parasitic empire can be understood as an empire that extracts resources, whether economic, political, or social, from its subjects without offering equitable benefits in return. The term parasitic is drawn from the biological concept of parasitism, where an organism benefits at the expense of another. In the context of empires, this might mean the domination of one state or people over another, using them as a source of labor, wealth, or strategic advantage, while giving little or nothing back. Parasitic empires are typically characterized by a stark imbalance in power dynamics, where the ruling entity reaps the rewards of the exploitation and the subjected peoples or regions bear the brunt of the costs. 2. Historical examples of parasitic empires. While empires throughout history have often relied on some form of extraction from their territories, several are particularly notable for their parasitic methods of control. These empires employed a combination of military, economic, and social dominance to maintain their hold, often to the detriment of their subjects. The Roman Empire. Exploiting the provinces. One of the earliest examples of a parasitic empire is the Roman Empire. Rome's expansion across Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia was marked by its systematic extraction of resources from conquered territories. Provinces were heavily taxed, and local economies were often reshaped to serve the needs of Rome, such as supplying food, raw materials, and soldiers for the empire. Although Rome did offer some degree of infrastructure, like roads and aqueducts, these were primarily designed to facilitate Roman control and access to resources rather than improve the lives of the subject populations. Roman soldiers, landowners, and elites benefited from the wealth of the provinces, often leaving the local populations impoverished and exploited. The British Empire. Colonial exploitation. The British Empire, at its height, spanned vast portions of the globe. While it introduced some modernization, particularly in infrastructure, the empire was predominantly parasitic in nature. The British extracted raw materials from colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, such as cotton, tea, and minerals, while enforcing systems of labor that often involved exploitation and forced servitude. The economic wealth generated from these colonies was funneled back to Britain, where it contributed to the growth of its industrial base, making Britain one of the wealthiest nations in the world. However, the colonized regions were left with broken economies, drained resources, and social structures that had been appended by colonial rule. The Spanish Empire. Gold and silver from the Americas. The Spanish Empire's exploitation of the Americas is another prime example of parasitic rule. The Spanish Empire's conquest of the Americas brought vast wealth in the form of precious metals, gold and silver, back to Spain. On the encomienda system forced indigenous peoples into labor, especially in the mines, while Spanish elites in the colonies grew increasingly wealthy from this extraction. This parasitic system had devastating effects on the native populations, with millions dying from diseases, forced labor, and exploitation. The wealth extracted from the Americas fueled Spain's imperial ambitions, but did little to uplift the people of its colonies. The Ottoman Empire. Exploitation of tributary states. The Ottoman Empire, which lasted from the 14th to the early 20th century, also engaged in a parasitic form of empire building. The Ottomans imposed taxes and tributes on conquered regions, especially in the Balkans and parts of North Africa. Additionally, the Devshirme system, which involved the forced recruitment of Christian boys for service in the military or as janissaries, can be viewed as another form of parasitism, exploiting both human and material resources for the benefit of the empire. While the Ottoman Empire provided a degree of stability and some infrastructure, its economic and political power largely relied on the extraction of wealth and resources from its subjects. 3. Mechanisms of parasitism in empires. Parasitic empires typically employ several key strategies to extract resources from their subjects. These strategies are designed to maximize wealth, power, and influence, while minimizing the cost to the imperial power. Here are some of the primary mechanisms. Economic extraction. One of the primary tools of parasitism is economic extraction. This can take the form of taxes, forced labor, or the monopolization of trade. Empires often imposed heavy taxes on local populations, extracting wealth from agriculture, mining, and trade. In many cases, these taxes were set at unsustainable levels, leading to economic hardship and poverty for the subject populations. 8. Resource exploitation. Empires frequently exploit natural resources such as minerals, agricultural products, or raw materials of the territories they control. These resources are then sent back to the imperial center, fueling the empire's growth while leaving little behind for the local population. This process often results in environmental degradation, as natural resources are extracted at unsustainable rates. Cultural domination and assimilation. Another method of parasitism is cultural domination. Empires often sought to impose their language, religion, and cultural norms on the conquered peoples. This served to weaken the social and cultural cohesion of the subject populations, making it easier for the empire to maintain control. In some cases, the imposition of foreign culture and religion led to the erasure of indigenous identities, cultures, and traditions. Military conquest and control. Military conquest was a common method by which empires expanded their power. Once a region was conquered, the empire would often impose a heavy military presence, using force to maintain control. This control would allow the empire to extract resources more efficiently and suppress any resistance to imperial rule. In many cases, local populations were required to serve in the empire's military or provide soldiers for wars, further strengthening the imperial power. 4. The impact of parasitic empires on subject populations. The effects of parasitic empires on the populations they subjugated were profound and often devastating. These empires, driven by the pursuit of wealth and power, frequently left their subjects with little to show for the resources they had provided. Economic inequality. Parasitic empires often exacerbated economic inequality within their territories. While the imperial elite grew wealthier from the resources of their colonies or provinces, the local populations were left in poverty. The wealth extracted from the colonies rarely benefited the local people, leaving them with few opportunities for upward mobility or economic development. Cultural erasure. Cultural domination often led to the erasure or transformation of indigenous cultures. Empires imposed their own languages, religions, and traditions on conquered peoples, leading to the loss of local customs, languages, and belief systems. This process of cultural assimilation or destruction had lasting effects on the identity and heritage of the subjugated populations. Social fragmentation. The social fabric of subject regions was often disrupted by the parasitic empire. Systems of governance were frequently replaced by imperial rule, and local leaders or traditional institutions were undermined. This led to social fragmentation, as people lost their sense of community and their connections to their heritage. Environmental damage. The exploitation of natural resources by parasitic empires often resulted in environmental damage. Deforestation, soil depletion, and overmining were common in areas under imperial control. As the empire's drive for wealth often led to the unsustainable extraction of resources. 5. The legacy of parasitic empires. The legacy of parasitic empires continues to be felt in many parts of the world today. Former colonies and conquered regions often struggle with the long-term consequences of exploitation. These consequences can include economic inequality, social fragmentation, and environmental degradation. Additionally, the cultural erasure experienced by many subject populations has left lasting scars on their identities and traditions. In some cases, the legacy of parasitism is seen in the ongoing political and economic relationships between former empires and their former colonies. The historical exploitations have created imbalances that continue to influence modern geopolitics. As some nations continue to benefit from the wealth and resources of others. 6. Conclusion. Parasitism in the modern world, while the great empires of the past may have fallen. The mechanisms of parasitism they used to maintain control still persist in modern forms. In today's world, economic exploitation, cultural dominance, and political manipulation continue to shape global power dynamics. The lessons of the past remind us that the pursuit of wealth and power, when unchecked, can lead to exploitation and suffering for those who are subjugated. The idea of the parasitic empire serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the need for a more equitable and just world order. Understanding the history and impact of parasitic empires is essential for addressing the inequities that persist in the modern world and for building a more just future for all.